Hello, it's Phillip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. Today I'm looking at a book which has come to us from Cambridge University Press. It's a textbook on the law of evidence, and it's been written by Nicola Monaghan. And I'm interested in reviewing this book for two main reasons. One is that I've taught evidence over many years, and I know how difficult and how actually treacherous it can be as a subject to study. And second, to show you the more modern way in which the subject is now being taught. Because one of the problems I came across, both in the LLB exams that I actually sat and the bar examinations, was the frankly very bad way in which many people put the subject matter across. The difficulty being that many people assumed that evidence was quite an easy subject, and it isn't. It's actually quite a difficult subject. And this is why I welcome Cambridge University Press's book, which has come from Nicola Monaghan. There's the front of the book, the side, and then the back, and there's a lot of comment on the back. It's a heavy paperback, runs to 500 pages. It's got a very useful index at the back, and then you get, if I go to the front, you'll see how it's structured. It sets out what it's about. I shall explain a little bit of it in this short video. There's the front page there. There are 14 chapters in total, and all the main contents, these are the contents here, there are the 14 chapters. All of them cover the very basics that you need both for the degree course and for professional exams. And there are a list of tables. Then you've got the cases. You see the structure is slightly different. Legislation, very important of course. And then you get into the actual book itself. The preface is worth reading because, as Nicola says, she started off, the law of evidence is a fascinating subject which covers a range of controversial and complex topics. Exactly. And she dedicates it to her grandmother at the end. I like to mention the dedications. Then we get to the actual content itself. Chapter 1, you've got a nice little short index at the front, and you've got paragraph numbering, which is very helpful, so you can find things quite quickly. You've got quite a lot of footnotes, which you can see there. You do have some boxed shaded areas, which is something that a lot of publications do like to have, and this one is actually the Judith Ward case. So this shaded area deals specifically with a case. And then if you run through, you've got other little sections like cross-referencing sections, because again, when you are looking at this subject as a textbook, it's one thing, but when you are a practitioner, you obviously have a whole range of other books which you may well be referring to as well. Because one of the things that becomes apparent very quickly with the law of evidence is the relationship that it has with procedure. And of course, today at the bar, within the bar study programs, the subjects are very much interlinked. So you do need to have a good grounding, and anybody who intends to practice as either a solicitor or a barrister must have, in my view, a very substantial and good grounding and be well taught in the law of evidence itself, because it's not the easiest subject. Some of the cases are pretty horrible too. Let me tell you a little bit about the book. We gave it the review title, Where We Are with This Difficult but Fascinating Subject of the Modern Law of Evidence in 2015. This is a brand new book, and I have to say to you that some of the textbooks that I actually used, which is a very long time ago now, were actually not the easiest in the world to read. And I did find them difficult to read, and I found the subject, some of the words they used, the phrases they used, I found those very confusing initially, and I'm sure a lot of people will do. So what we do need is something that's much more modern in its learning objectives, and that's exactly what you get with Nicola's book. What we say though is that evidence is a difficult subject, which often appears superficially at least easy for the law student, and the answer to that is no, it isn't. It's actually a difficult subject, and you do need to bear in mind that there is a very substantial amount of case law. And in fact, one of the things that I think will assist anybody who's a student of, certainly a law student, with an eye to professional practice, would need to read about the law of evidence in conjunction with journals such as the Criminal Law Review, where you get very much more recent case law coming in, because your own really is good sometimes as the case law, which actually appears as a result of a new piece of legislation. I can think of the numerous criminal justice acts that we've had and various other tinkering over the years and changes that have taken place in the way we deal with evidence when it comes to court practice. Evidence, therefore, both civil and criminal, has a huge amount of case law, as I say, and it can seem never-ending when you're either learning it, teaching it, or actually practicing it. And of course that was the problem with some of the case books. One found that the case books got out of date quite quickly, which is why I actually use the Criminal Law Review for certainly for examinations, to be as up to date as I could be. As I say, it's not an easy subject, although some think it is, and you can come unstuck both in terms of both academic and professional exams, unless you have something like Nicola Monaghan's book, which I think puts this subject into some form of perspective. It's certainly an addition, I think, to the literature on evidence, and learners often struggle with the technical aspects of evidence. I did myself, and I make no bones about it. Also, when I've taught it, I have found that quite a few students have not understood some of the more intricate areas, which is why, again, you do need something where it's quite clearly set out as to what the rules are. Because when you're actually looking at the effect of certain pieces of evidence, when you're taking account of some of the legislation and some of the steps that are set out in, say, sections of the Criminal Justice Act, just to take one example, you can see how books like this will tackle the law in a clear and very accessible modern manner, and that's what she's done. I think it's also a critical and contextual rendition, I believe this has been quoted from others, of the rules of evidence in both civil and criminal proceedings, and she's adopted, we think, and we certainly concur with the view, a lucid and magisterial style of writing, which makes the text both navigable for beginners and for those more experienced people who are possibly going into practice. Without saying too much, it is actually an up-to-date text on evidence, which incorporates the views of other text book writers and discusses not only statutory provisions on evidence, which of course are of primary importance today, but also the impact of European law, the conventions and so on, and obviously cases both in the United Kingdom and in Strasbourg. And I think the key strength of the text does remain the inclusion of a summary and self-test questions and various pointers to further reading, because whilst evidence can be set out in a reasonably good textbook, there's an awful lot of additional material that you're going to pick up over the years. So this is really a primer to start you off. I think it's very well written, very well presented. It's in the style of Cambridge University Press, and I think they have succeeded in their objective. Clearly Monaghan has a substantial knowledge of the law of evidence, and she brings it to the fore very much in the way she presents the factual analysis to the reader. I think there's a great balance, of course, between giving learners an overview of particular topics and giving them detailed knowledge of the cases. It's got a straightforward explanation of many of the rules with some useful analysis, and I think it does introduce students very well to the full range of topics which are covered in any of the main courses. Now there's obviously going to be a bit of an overlap here depending on which course you're doing, but the basic content is always there. Learning outcomes, I think, are also further supported by the numerous additional points that are in the actual textbook itself. It does in fact offer a very useful overview of the subject, and she does in fact throughout maintain a strong practical focus, so you feel you know what you're doing. Let me just show you the book again so you've got some idea of actually what's in it, because there is a lot in it. You've got quite a large number of figures and tables. I didn't want to spend too much time on that, but you can see where they are there, setting out in at least a diagrammatic form some of the points. I mentioned about things such as the further reading. At the back of each of the chapters, for instance, Professor Di Birch is mentioned for further reading. She's one of the leading, certainly in the past, one of the leading commentators. Again, the Criminal Law Review is heavily referred to. And I can't stress too strongly the fact that you do need to have cross-referencing going on. Again, each chapter has a useful conclusion and then the reading at the back, the actual essential reading at the back. I do think it's quite useful. Again, there has been a lot of selective case law referencing, and then you've got actually the name of the relevant judge and the extract, which is, again, I think the most pertinent aspect of what you can do. This is actually on the law of corroboration of evidence, for instance, there. But as I say, it's a heavy book, actually. The paper's nice, so it's not something that's going to rip too quickly. For instance, you've got another classic example here. You've got, again, a very substantial extract from a case there. And then you've got some form of commentary that goes after it, which I also think is useful, because one of the problems with some of the older textbooks has been that when you're looking at this subject, you would get quite a lot of the extracts of the comments by the judiciary. You might actually have some extracts from learned journals and so forth, but that would be the end of it. And what you do need to have is a little bit more of an analysis of exactly what the subject is about, so that you can get some perspective on it. Because you do, with the subject of the law of evidence, you do need to have an overall view of what the subject is about. Because, as I say, there is an interlink here with procedure, and when you do the professional exams, you will find quite quickly that there is actually quite a clear mixture between the law of evidence and the law of procedure, both in criminal and in civil matters. Anyway, let me conclude by thanking Nicola Monaghan very much indeed for this book. Let's show you it again. There it is. And you can see the contents listed there at the back. It's an excellent book. Thank you to Cambridge University Press as well for taking the plunge and producing this. There's a lot of material now available by way of textbooks on the market, but this I think is one of the best, and I certainly would be using it when I teach. So thank you to all concerned for an excellent new book in this area. Bye bye.